In this video, I am joined by a very special guest, friend of the channel, family of the channel, Mr. Matthew Murr. We're talking all about the possibility of Apple buying Disney. Rumors are heating up once again about that. We're also going to talk about, is Disney savable, right? We've been hearing a lot of talk about the Walt Disney Company not doing so great, 7,000 layoffs. Is this company savable, or is it going down a path already that it's just irreversible? We're going to discuss it up next. Matthew Murr, special guest on Orange Nerd. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Orange Nerd Show, where we talk about everything except the theme parks. We talk about nerd culture, Star Wars, Marvel, the movies, streaming, and the corporate side of all this stuff that we love. And today we're focusing a lot on the corporate side. But before we dive into our topic today, I want to introduce Mr. Matthew Murr. Welcome back to the channel, Matthew.
Thank you, OG.
It's an absolute honor having you on, sir. If you want to, well, you're on Twitter, but what I'm going to do, Matthew, is I'm going to go ahead and share your Twitter link in the show notes, the description down below. Everyone at home should definitely follow Matthew Murr. He is
because it's a very lengthy address.
It's a very lengthy address, exactly. A lot of numbers and stuff. So I'll just link it down below, and everyone should definitely give him a follow. He is absolutely fantastic. Now, Matthew, let's dive into our first topic here, right? Now, we've heard this rumor many times. Apple buying Disney, right? It's an interesting prospect of Apple buying Disney. I mean, Apple's a premium brand, right? They focus big time on quality and brand protection and what have you. They're very protective of the Apple brand, and rightfully so. And Disney is sort of a similar kind of situation, right? It's premium product, focus on quality, very protective of their brand. What do you think the chances of an Apple buying Disney are? You think this is even likely?
I would probably say it's not. I don't think it's at all likely that Apple will buy Disney outright. There is a possibility, though, that they may buy certain assets from Disney, particularly streaming, because I know that's one thing we've talked about quite a bit over the last few months.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I completely agree with you, Matthew. I mean, I think that's the chances of, look, on paper, it sounds really, really sexy, right? Like Apple owning Disney, that would be a mega corporation. They'd have all the content, they'd have the distribution with the iPhones and all that. It'd be fantastic. But that would be a monstrous company. And right now, getting those regulatory approvals would be very difficult. They're very particular right now in regards to these big mergers. Very unlikely. But if they do what you said, Matthew, where it's like, okay, what if we offload Hulu to Apple? What if we even sell maybe even Disney Plus to Apple and license and Apple pays a licensing fee to use Disney's content? Now you're talking. This is something that could possibly happen. You think that's more likely? Would you support that? Would you like them to do that?
I would say I'm more half and half. I'm on the fence with it, because on the one hand, if they were to sell it, it may make it harder for Disney to maintain creative control over their content. On the other hand, though, it would probably ease the burden of debt significantly, because Disney, as you said, Ed, a couple of times, is billions of dollars in debt. Aren't they still at least 4 or 5 billion in debt at the moment?
Yeah, it would definitely ease the debt situation quite a bit. It might. You're right. It might create some creative issues, right? Lose a little control, maybe. It's a possibility. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's interesting how this rumor about Apple buying Disney seems to always rear its head, though, right? I mean, I've been in the Disney community for a really, really long time. Decades, literally decades, since like AOL dial-up. You know, I'm old. but I've heard this rumor maybe a dozen times over the past, maybe 10 or 15 years, that this was a possibility. And look, I think, maybe in 2005 when Roy Disney and Stan Gold started the Save Disney campaign, and Disney was a much smaller company back then. They didn't own Pixar, they didn't own Star Wars or LucasFilm.
In a lot of ways, it was more vulnerable.
It was much more vulnerable. Absolutely. It was a much smaller company, and it was much more easily swallowed up by a big corporation. But now it's like Disney's so big. I mean, it would really take like an Apple or even like an Amazon to even buy Disney. But then when you have those massive companies coming in and buying Disney, which is also a massive company, now you're with the problem of like, well, will they even approve it? Will the feds or whatever, will they approve that kind of deal? Will the Department of Justice even allow something like that? And I doubt it. I really, really do. I don't think that would ever go through. And I'm glad. I mean, to be honest with you, Matthew, I mean, I know you and I both, we love Disney tremendously. And would you be a little heartbroken if another company like an Apple, as great as Apple is, bought Disney? Would that bother you as a Disney fan?
Absolutely.
That Disney would, yeah.
Yeah, because Disney, in my opinion, should be able to maintain full creative control. And that's part of the reason why, I know I'm going off subject a little bit, but I'm also a bit wary of Universal buying Warner Brothers, or even merging with Viacom.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, there's been rumors about a lot of rumors right now. I know you've been following it closely too, Matthew, about the possibility of David Zaslav selling Warner Discovery to Comcast Universal, right? There's been some talks about that too, and even that deal is like that would be a monstrous company. I mean, that would be huge. I don't even know if they would approve that. That's huge. You'd have to offload so much from both sides to even get that done. So it's extremely interesting. Now, the other thing the other issue that I think that comes about too with this whole idea of Apple buying Disney. I know Wall Street's really pushing it. I know that like the Hollywood outlets, they're really pushing it and stuff like that. You really see these articles, come about every so often. But one big issue is that Disney's been very public lately about the succession plan from Bob Iger, right? They have the chairman of the board, I think his name is Mark Parker from Nike. He's heading up this whole succession plan thing at Disney. They're looking for a successor for Bob Iger when he leaves in 2 years. And we're seeing moves being made. We see Josh D'Amaro at the Oscars. He's a parks chief. Why is he at the Oscars? Well, they're grooming him to be a potential CEO candidate. You see Dana Walden over at the parks. Again, she's a studio person. Why is she at the parks? Well, they're also grooming her to get a little more well-rounded because she's a potential candidate to be CEO. So if they were to be seriously talking to Apple about potentially a sale to them, all the CEO stuff would be kabuki theater. It would be for nothing because the CEO of the company would just be Tim Cook. If Apple bought Disney, that's the new CEO, right? I mean, am I wrong on that or?
No, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, so it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I keep hearing these outlets say that there's such a huge likelihood, or there's even a good chance that this is going to happen. I'm just not seeing it. Look, if I was Dana Walden, who I do think is the leading contender to be the next Disney CEO right now, at least, if I'm Dana Walden, I'm going. I mean, like that would kind of piss me off, right? I'd be like, what am I doing then? Why am I wasting my time if you're going to sell the company to Apple? Now, there's also been rumors that Disney might sell something like Lucasfilm to Apple or maybe some other company. How would you feel about that? Would you be okay with them maybe carting off Lucasfilm or even Marvel?
I'm very on the fence about it. And actually, no, not even on the fence, just very wary about it, because people keep saying that in order for Lucasfilm or Marvel to go less woke, it needs to be separated from Disney. But I'm actually skeptical about whether or not it really would be much less progressive.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you, Matthew. People, like, the grass is always greener on the other side. It's easy to be like, yeah, if only Disney sold Lucasfilm, it would get the woke out. Not necessarily. Hollywood is a very progressive industry, and it always has been. I mean, it's even before the whole woke movement, Hollywood's always been very heavily Democrat. It's just not a new thing, and it's not going to end anytime soon. Okay, these companies are not just going to suddenly become the Daily Wire. Okay, I mean, it's always going to be left leaning. Now, I do believe that that Disney, these Hollywood studios, are making a really good faith effort in moderating, and they should. But moderating and coming away from the far left and coming closer to the middle doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go to the right. And I don't think Disney's going to go to the right. They're just moving.
Really.
They can't. Yeah, they can't. And selling it off to somebody, who are you going to sell Lucasfilm to? Name a studio that you would sell it to that would be less woke. I mean, they all have. Warner Brothers has woke problems up the wazoo, even with Zazie there.
And we can't just put George Lucas back in charge because he was born in 1944.
Oh, right. You can't sell it to George. I mean, even if he was willing to take it on again, we would be in the same situation in a few years when he ultimately has to pass it on to somebody else. Right. And we have to remember
when the prequels were scorned.
Right. When the prequels were scorned and fans hated the prequels. And we also have to remember Kathleen Kennedy was his pick. That was not a Bob Iger choice. That was George Lucas. And I love George Lucas. I think he's a brilliant, legendary man, brilliant visionary. But we got to be honest with the facts. He chose Kathleen Kennedy. So if you sell it to George, you think that you're going to have any different outcome? Well, you don't think he's going to just give it back to her when he's done with it? Or like what? I mean, he's the one who put her there in the first place. So I don't know. That whole thing, and plus it, if you sell off a Lucasfilm or you sell off a Marvel or you sell off a Pixar, the problem with doing that on the studio end, fine, but it would lead to issues company wide. Number one, because all these properties, whether you're talking Star Wars, whether you're talking even Indiana Jones, whether you're talking Pixar or MCU and Marvel, are so heavily integrated into the theme parks now. So yes, you would make a few $1 billion selling Lucasfilm to Apple or George Lucas or whoever, but now you're paying somebody else forever to use these properties in your park. So now you're becoming Universal, basically, where you're licensing stuff out. And I've said before, that's not a great strategy. It's not a good place to be. I think Universal wants to move away from that eventually as much as they can. And I think Disney should absolutely not go into that situation, but they don't have to. It doesn't make any sense to make, a few $1 billion now and then have to pay even more in the years and decades to come. It makes no sense because that's what you would be doing. If someone else owned Lucasfilm, you can't tear down Galaxy's Edge and the Indiana Jones Adventure and Avengers Campus in 2 different parks now and all that stuff. You can't do it. So you'd have to pay somebody else to use those characters. Well, why? Why would you do that? So it really doesn't make much sense to sell those off. And I've been seeing those rumors quite a bit too. Have you been seeing that, Matthew, around the internet?
No, about them selling Lucasfilm or.
Yeah, about selling Lucasfilm. You've seen that too?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of rumors, but I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's really worth it at all because who are they going to sell it to? And people keep saying that Kennedy needs to go in order to make it less progressive, but people refuse to ask the question as to whether or not she's the only person who could really do these sorts of things with Star Wars. Right.
Now, let's get into a little bit about Kathleen Kennedy. I know you have a lot of opinions on her and her leadership approach for Lucasfilm.
I will say she's just a very complex person.
Interesting. So what do you stand overall? Like in terms of you think it's time for a new person to jump in, or you think that maybe she can turn it around, or where do you stand with this?
I think I know I'm going to sound controversial in saying this, but I actually kind of feel sorry for Kennedy. I think the burden of having to lead Lucasfilm has just been too much for her. She's a great producer, but she isn't a good president.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that. I think that you can be, a good player, but not necessarily a good coach, right? And I think that's kind of where she's at. Like, I agree. She's a phenomenal producer. She has an incredible resume, but as a studio head, as a studio chief, she's been terrible. We've seen she's gone through more directors than she's made movies, right? Lately, her interviews have been absolute garbage fire. I mean, just straight up just pretending that the Kevin Feige Star Wars movie wasn't a thing when all the Hollywood trades were reporting on it. I mean, that was not a good look for her. There's been a lot of PR blunders, a lot of behind the scenes problems. I think it's time for new leadership. I think if it was up to me, which obviously it isn't, but I would love to see a Jon Favreau in there, maybe running the studio, and maybe have Dave Filoni right underneath him. I think that's probably the most ideal, but we'll see. I mean, there's been rumors about her leaving for a long, long time, and she's still there. And it's wild, Matthew. It's really, really wild. We'll just kind of have to wait and see how that pans out. Now the big rumor is that after Indy 5, she might leave. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most likely outcome.
Yeah, that's
Because I don't
interesting.
think Lucasfilm under her at least has any further major projects.
Yeah, yeah.
Indiana Jones 5 might be the beginning of a course correction.
Right, exactly. Are you pretty hopeful on Indiana 5? You think that's gonna be a good movie,
Yeah, it actually looks pretty good. It actually looks quite promising, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I've been really excited about the trailers look really good. I'm a huge James Mangold fan. I don't know if you saw Ford v Ferrari, phenomenal movie. Um, Logan. I mean, he knows what he's doing. We'll see if that translates into Indiana Jones. Hopefully it does, because this is a fantastic franchise, and this is definitely going to be, I think, Harrison Ford's last chance to play this character, and I really want to see him go out with a strong movie, right? To kind of make good after the Crystal Skull debacle, right?
Yeah, the exact kind of thing that people thought that the sequels would be to the prequels.
Right. Exactly. So let's pivot now, Matthew, from this to our next topic, which is the Walt Disney Company savable, right? And I know a lot of people probably watching going, what do you mean savable? It's this huge corporation. It's invincible. It's never going to go down because it's Disney. Well, I mean, look, I've been saying for a long time that nothing is too big to sink. Okay, and that includes Disney. And when the pandemic was here, and a lot of fans were saying, "Yeah, just keep the park shut down as long as it takes." I was saying you can't do that. Disney as a corporation cannot sustain that for years on end. And it can fall no matter how big it is. And it's going through a lot right now. Major layoffs, 7,000 to be exact, company wide, economic turmoil all around. They're getting a lot of heat from fans. The movies aren't necessarily hitting what they should be hitting, with like Strange World and Lightyear, even Quantumania. Disney's going through it right now. So the question is, can they turn it around? Can they right the ship? Can they get things back on track to where they were kind of like the pre-pandemic? In your opinion, Matthew, is this possible?
I would say most likely, because as you once said, Disney has been through far worse than this before. As worrying as this current situation might be, they have been through worse. If prior experience is anything to go by.
They have been through far worse, and I think a lot of people don't really realize that. I mean, Disney right now is having its problems, right? But as we said earlier, they're not really they're so big. It's hard for other companies outside of like an Amazon or an Apple to come in and swallow them up, right? Where back in like say the early 80s, when they were struggling, they were a small company. I mean, pretty much it was Walt Disney Productions, and it was a much easier hostile takeover target from these companies to come in and swallow that up. They were in some bad shape back then. I mean, the animated films were really doing not great. I know they're not doing good now, but I mean, we're talking that the animation was in such bad condition back then that there were real talks about not doing them anymore. Right? I mean, they were that was a real possibility. They moved the animation out of their own studio into like these bungalows. A lot of the Little Mermaid was animated in these little bungalows. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. Right, Matthew? I mean, compare that to now. There's no comparison. I mean, yes, we're going through it right now. Absolutely under no illusion that the Walt Disney Company is going through a bad time, or a very challenging time at the very least, but nothing compared to what we saw in the early 80s. Absolutely nothing. And honestly, it's almost not even as bad as 2005 with the Save Disney stuff with Roy Disney, because back then, like I said, the company was smaller and it was a much more easily obtainable target for takeovers. But what do you think? You think that
I think it is actually actually nowhere near as bad as either of those crises. there is the ill chance that something major could happen. I think all we can really do is just keep our wits about us. All we can really do is just watch the situation closely.
Yeah, we just have to watch it. It's definitely like, as fans, I think it's important to recognize the reality on the ground. And the reality is yes, as a company, it's rough right now. It's rough out there. And it's not just Disney. I know a lot of fans, they focus on Disney. So when we see 1,000 headlines about Disney and Disney's layoffs and Disney this and Disney that, the perception is like Disney's the only company going through this, and it's like it's just an exclusive Disney problem, and it really isn't. You know, all these major companies, even Amazon and all these highly successful corporations, are going through layoffs and going through economic strife. So it's not just Disney, and we have to keep that in mind, you know. But I do think they're savable. I do think that I think the moves we're seeing right now from Bob Iger, moderating the company, getting less political.
Yeah, the beginning of the course correction.
It's the beginning of the course correction, and these kind of things take time, right? Like the content we're seeing now. A lot of people think like, okay, like the Little Mermaid is very, you know, there's a huge group that thinks you know, Little Mermaid is woke. That's fine. I respect that. No worries. But you know, and it's almost like, okay, it's woke, so they're not changing. And I respectfully disagree with that, because Little Mermaid is not a product of 2023. It's getting released in 2023, but it's not
just a product of a few years earlier.
Exactly. It's a product of like 2018, 2019. These things, these films, this content is in development for years. So the stuff we're seeing today, the Proud Family, Little Mermaid, all this stuff, the Peter Pan and Wendy, that's all stuff from like 3 years ago. So the stuff that's being implemented now, the new strategy, we're not going to see the fruits of that until 2026, maybe even 2027. So I wouldn't, if you're on team moderate, right? If you're rooting for Disney to moderate and get less woke, as they say, then I think it's imperative that we're patient, because there's a lot of residual stuff out there that's got to get released in through the pipeline, and a lot of that has nothing to do with the strategy of today, you know. And Little Mermaid is one of them. If you're against that movie, I mean, that's something that was in the pipeline for years. They can't just. It's not so easy to cut bait, you know what I'm saying?
It's been in the pipeline for much longer than most people seem to think.
I'm sorry, what was that, Matthew?
It's been in the pipeline for a lot longer than many people seem to think it was.
Oh no, it is. Oh, absolutely. And people say, well, you know, David Zaslav, he just cut bait from Batgirl. That's true, but their situation is a little different because they just had a huge merger. There's all kinds of taxings around all that stuff. Disney didn't go through that, and it's a little different situation. And plus, too, with Little Mermaid, I mean, we don't really know how that's going to perform. I mean, to be quite honest with you, now I have no desire to see it. I mean, I love Haley Bailey. I think she's phenomenal, talented young woman. I'm a big fan of hers, but I'm not big into these live action films. I'm just not. But I've do very well.
Them, to be honest,
you've never been in. Well, I know you're a big animation guy, Matthew. You love the Renaissance era, right?
Yeah, and I just don't think there was any real point in these live action remakes.
No, they're shameless cash grabs. And the problem, though, Matthew, is like you and I, we love the Renaissance era. We're huge Howard Ashman fans, right?
Yeah, and to a lesser extent, Tim Rice.
It's what? I'm sorry?
And to a lesser extent, Tim Rice, the songwriter who took over from Howard Ashman partway through Aladdin.
Yes, exactly. And we're huge fans of these legends, and it's kind of upsetting to see. Well, maybe not upsetting is the right word. It's kind of bittersweet, right? To see Disney sort of like, we can improve upon a masterpiece. It's like, what do you mean you can improve upon like these movies are masterpieces, like Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid. These are such incredible pieces of art and cinema. And you're going to go there and you're going to try to improve upon it. And that's fine. And there's an audience for it, and people will go see it. And that's fine. But just for me personally, and I think for you as well, Matthew, it's like, we feel like, why try to mess with perfection? Why not do something completely new? So, you know, why don't you go in there and try to create a new story for Halle Bailey, right? Because she's phenomenal. Like, why not give her something new instead of just kind of retreading these older stories? And they just feel kind of cheap, right? These remakes and stuff. But you know, look, I have an open mind overall, and if people come out of this saying The Little Mermaid is fantastic, maybe I'll go see it. Maybe I'll give it a chance. I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. But very few of these live action remakes have really hit the target for me. Most of them come in way under their animated rivals, right?
The only two I can think of off the top of my head that have actually hit the mark are probably Cinderella and The Jungle Book.
Yeah, exactly. No, those are. Hey, Jungle Book was Jon Favreau, and he's phenomenal. And Cinderella was really good. Cinderella was like the perfect amount of like, okay, it's reminiscent of the animated film, but it's new enough where it kind of does its own thing. So I would agree with you, Matthew. Those are the two that were really fantastic. The rest of them, not really big fans, but we'll see. But now, do you think? Okay, here's the other thing too. I wanted to ask you, Matthew, because a lot of people will say the reason why Disney's in this mess is because they went woke. Do you think that's the case, or do you think there's other factors involved in this?
I would say it's probably the case, but not for the reasons that most people seem to think. Or at least not exclusively for the reasons that most people seem to think. People refuse to ask whether or not Bob Iger was really the only person who really had that mindset back in 2005, as Iger was on his way out.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's interesting with that whole thing because people look. I used to be, full disclosure, I was a big, and I've said this on the channel before, but for people new to the channel, it's worth repeating. I was a big fan of Bernie Sanders back in 2016, and I followed his campaign very closely. I was every bit a Bernie bro. I was on board the Bernie train, you know, and you know, Bob Iger back then, and this was in 2016. Bob Iger back then was he was very critical of Bernie Sanders. He wasn't like this. Like Bob Iger was not this far leftist in 2016. He was more of the corporate Democrat Hillary Clinton kind of person, and he had more disagreements with like a Bernie Sanders. It wasn't until he wanted to run for president, or there were rumors that he was going to run for president, and this whole like woke kind of movement started to really become popular, that he decided he was going to hitch his wagon to that train, right? And I think Iger is at his core more moderate than people think he is. I think he's coming more. I think what we're seeing now with the moderation with Bob Iger is a more return to form than anything else. I don't think he's a super woke person. I really don't. I think he's a corporate Democrat, more in line with a Clinton. But you kind of agree with that, or you think I'm kind of off base?
I actually do. I always thought more Bob Iger was more milquetoast liberal and centrist than really woke, because he was that way in his early years up until like 2012.
Right. And
that was when he started to abuse his power.
Yes, he did. In 2012, the big thing that happened was that he was also not only the CEO, but he was chairman of the board, right? So he was the Lord Emperor King of Disney post 2012. And that's when you started to see the wheels fall off a little bit, the cracks in the Disney empire a little bit, maybe 3-4 years after that, right? Because there was a lag that we talked about. So now, the other interesting thing too about like the woke and all that is it's very difficult to determine if something failed because it was too political. Like, for example, Strange World and Lightyear. Those movies absolutely flopped. Terrible at the box office. Did they fail because of the ideology though? Or did they fail because they were bland and boring movies? I don't know.
Say a bit of both.
A little bit of both. Yeah, because it's kind of almost like dying. When they say people died, okay, you can die with COVID or you can die from COVID, right? So if you have a heart attack but you had COVID when you died from the heart attack, doesn't mean you died from COVID. You really died from a heart attack. You just happen to have COVID when you passed away, right? That's very different than actually dying from COVID. So that's kind of like how I feel about these movies. Is like, did they fail because it was woke, or did they fail because they were bland and they happened to be woke, right? That's an interesting conversation to have. And like you said, Matthew, I think there's a little bit of both here. I think people are tired of the political grandstanding and all that. And but also they were just not good movies. You know, Strange World looked very, very boring. I had no desire to watch that. I don't care about the politics, but I just didn't care to see it. It didn't look good. It didn't look good. Now, did you get a chance to watch it, Matthew? Strange World or Lightyear for that matter?
No, not really.
No interest, huh?
But just taking your word for it.
Yeah,
I've no
yeah,
intention of seeing either of them.
yeah. It's interesting. Now, I know you're a bit like we talked about. You're big on animation. What do you think about Disney animation going forward? You know, they've had some. Yeah, look, they had the Encanto, big hit. I mean, definitely they had Frozen 2 a few years ago, massive hit. But look, Universal and Nintendo, they got a movie out right now, Super Mario Brothers, and it's crushing right now. It's probably going to be $1 billion movie. What do you think the future for Disney animation is? Do you think they're going to turn this around? Do you think they're worried right now with those Super
Probably going to
Nintendo
turn
stuff?
it around because we are already starting to see films like Wish, which does actually look quite promising.
Wish does look promising. Wish does look promising. It's a return to form for Disney. Disney is very much a fairy tale studio, and when Disney does the fairy tale thing, it tends to do very well. And if you look at Disney's history, almost every time they've had a resurgence in animation, it's always started with a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking Tangled in 2010, that got the whole modern era started of string of hits after that. Whether you're talking about older like Little Mermaid, not only was the beginning of the Renaissance era, but it really saved the company.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
Disney
think
was going through it. Go ahead, Matthew.
I think though the Great Mouse Detective, but as of the Great Mouse Detective, was the beginning of that. First, that was a relative success back in 1986, and then Oliver and Company came out 2 years later, and that was a success. But then Little Mermaid happened. It was like
Yeah.
they needed to moderate back steadily.
Yeah, exactly. And Snow White was the one that started it all. That was the one that kicked off all the animated films. So they do have a when they do these fairy tales, it does seem that they do resonate. That people associate Disney with these fairy tale musicals, and they tend to support them when they come out. So I think a movie like, to your credit, Matthew, I think a movie like Wish, which seems like it's going to lean into that. It's a musical. From what we heard a little bit at D23, sounds very classical Disney. There's potential with this one, and I'm rooting for it. I've said many times, I think Disney animation should really focus on these fairy tales and the storybook element of what they are, and let Pixar do more of the modern kind of stuff, right? That's a whole different studio, but Disney needs to be more traditional, a little more storybooky. And to see them going back to Wish, a movie like Wish, I think is really encouraging. So that'll be interesting. But what do you think though about the competition factor right now? Super Mario is all over the news right now. Huge hit.
I would say it is good in a sense that it keeps Disney on notice.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no,
Disney
it does.
needs the competition to keep them in check.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it keeps them on notice for sure. I mean, I'm sure Bob Iger and Jennifer Lee and Pete Docter and all them at Disney, I'm sure they're sitting up and taking notice. This is a massive thing. Look, I'm at my core, I am a Disney person, and I make no bones about my bias. I am rooting for Disney. I want the company that Walt Disney founded to do very, very well. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge when other companies step up and do very well. And I think Universal right here with Nintendo, they have a smash hit on their hands, a big hit on their hands. And not only just this movie, but a potential cinematic universe going forward with all the other movies they could possibly make. So this is a big deal for them. And Disney has to take notice of that and take it very, very seriously. And I think they are. I think Iger and crew, I think they're looking at that going, okay, we gotta step this up. We cannot play games in animation anymore because that's what we are. We are an animation studio at our core, and we can't lose that to a company like Comcast, right? It's not a good look. it's really not a good look. So, but overall, Matthew, you think the Walt Disney Company though will be okay in the end, right? I mean, this is something that you think they'll turn it around, and
yeah, they probably will.
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope so. And fans need to not take this company for granted because, like I said earlier, and you've said it too, Matthew. Nothing is too big to fail, and even Disney could fall. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, growing up in the '80s, right? Sears catalog was the biggest freaking thing. I mean, this was like the retail Bible. Okay. If anyone at home in their 40s or even like 50s or whatever, you guys remember Sears catalog and how big of a deal that was every Christmas? Sears was a massive, massive thing. Okay. Massive company, decades and decades old company. I think it was like over 100 years old when it went under, but it went under. And that juggernaut fell, right? Now there's different circumstances around every company failing or going under. I mean, I understand that their set of circumstances might be different than what Disney's going through and all that. But the overall point though, is that nothing is too big to fall. And even Disney, if they do enough, if they have enough bad decisions, could absolutely fall. I'm just not seeing evidence of that occurring right now. I think that they are going through it, and I think that they will. It seems like they're taking the right steps, and I think they're going to ultimately come out of it okay. But we'll see. We'll see what kind of company Disney is at the end of all this. What it looks like. Maybe like you said, maybe they sell some of these streaming services like Hulu and what have you. I mean, there's talks maybe they're going to spin off ESPN and all that. So we'll see what kind of company Disney looks like at the end of it. But at the end of the day, though, I agree with you, Matthew. I think Disney will be just fine. So I think you and I both were the eternal optimists, right?
Yeah, we basically are.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, I want to thank you, brother, for coming on, talking shop with me today. You are family here at OG55, and we would love to have you back on very soon. But if you could let everybody at home know, well, actually, I'll let everybody at home know because it's going to be down below. In the show notes, Matthew has a Twitter. I will link it down below again. Follow him on Twitter. He is absolutely phenomenal. He's a very passionate guy about the Walt Disney Company and its history. And, I highly urge you all to follow him. But Matthew, I just want to thank you once again for coming on, brother. I know you're all the way in the UK, so the time zone thing is, what time is it there right now, by the way? Just out of curiosity.
Almost 6:40 p.m.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Not too bad then. Not too bad. But I appreciate you, Matthew, coming on. Thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody at home watching this episode of the Orange Nerd Show. Comment down below with all your thoughts on Apple buying Disney, possibly Disney selling off properties like Hulu and even maybe LucasFilm. Is Disney savable? Disney got into a lot of politics. A lot of people feel like that was the wrong move. They're trying to moderate. Is it too little, too late? What are your thoughts on it? I would love to hear from you. Again, thank you, Matthew, for coming on. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.